Kris Bowers, you're the composer on Dear White People, which just aired its first season on Netflix, to great critical acclaim and wonderful responses from audiences. What do you think accounts for the immediate response that people had for this show?
Yeah, I think it's just speaking to a lot of people's truths. I think right now we're dealing with a point in time where people are feeling like they're not heard or understood, and their identities are being questioned. And I think that's something that is true for a lot of people. And so that's what Dear White People speaks to. And I think that has resonated with a lot of people in our generation.
Talk a little bit about the show. I mean, it's based on a movie that Justin Simien directed 3 years ago.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the show.
So the show kind of takes the place, starts in a similar place where there's a fraternity that throws a blackface party and kind of sends the campus into a spiral and into this deep conversation about racism and so on and so forth. But the show, because each episode focuses on a different character, the show actually is able to delve a little bit deeper into each character's personal struggle with what's happening. And also it kind of extends beyond just that party. And you see how the campus reacts to that, how some of the administration reacts to that, and how some of these hypocritical things that people are dealing with are illuminated a bit more, you know?
So tell us a little bit about your initial ideas for the music and the show. What were your original concepts?
So what was interesting is to get the job, they actually sent me the show Bible, the first episode script, and a Spotify playlist of about 50 or so tracks that ranged from Sonny Rollins to Trent Reznor to Ravel and all these different things. And they asked me to compose something based on that. And so my first inclination was to try to combine all those elements as best as I could. And I wrote something that I felt did that. But once I got the job, we actually started talking a bit more about how interesting it would be to juxtapose these young students, mostly of color, with either traditional classical music or traditional jazz, like bebop era music. And so that kind of became the template. We were really sure to, as much as possible, focus on those sounds for the score.
And talk about the score and I guess the larger context of the narrative of these 10 episodes, because you're not really working, I mean, each episode has its own narrative, but it's within the larger context of this 5-hour narrative.
Yeah, exactly. And we try to really do that with the score as well. So every episode has focuses on a character, and we try to establish that character's theme. And what I actually tried to do is be strict with myself in only using that original theme as the thematic material for every piece of music in that episode. And so you might hear in one episode, in Troy's episode, for example, his theme might first appear in like a synthesizer kind of Baroque style piano piece, but then later it comes back as a string orchestra. Then it comes back later as a almost like a Bach fugue, where his theme is the subject of that fugue, and so on and so forth. And so as each of the characters start to, as their stories start to cross over and intermingle as the season continues, I tried to start introducing their themes in other episodes. So as Sam and Reggie have their thing, sometimes you hear Reggie's theme now, even though it might be Sam's episode. And by the final episode, all of the themes are kind of weaving in and out of one another.
So was there a particular theme or episode or scene that was difficult for you to score in some way?
Yeah, there were a lot. I mean, I think there were so many because for a lot of the temp music, he's really inspired by Kubrick and Spike Lee. And so with that, there were a lot of times where he wanted either really huge, grand orchestral piece, like some of the more climactic parts in the last episode. I'd say the last episode is probably the most difficult. 95% of the episode is score, and some of those pieces go for almost like 15 minutes straight or 10 minutes straight, from kind of the beginning of the climax up until the resolution. And so I think that might have been the hardest thing because of the temp for it. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something that was pretty like romantic era orchestral music, and it was pretty difficult to try to emulate something like that but still make it original.
It's a very stylistic show too.
Yeah.
It's grounded in realism, but it also, takes these sort of visual flights of fancy. There are moments where people talk directly to the camera, look directly at the camera. Was that stylistic adventurousness, shall we say, of the show? Was that influential in your score?
Yeah, it kind of then makes you able to. I think that's what allowed us to write such grand music and such because it doesn't really. It's that thin line between taking itself too seriously and still being comedic, and having the writing do that and the way they shot it do that. I think then if I write some huge orchestral piece under an emotional scene, it doesn't feel like we're trying to be too manipulative, or it doesn't feel melodramatic, because it just fits with the way they stylize the whole thing.
So take us through the process of scoring a particular episode. What is your working process like?
Yeah, well, before we even started, one thing that Justin and I did was try to establish some of these themes early, because we knew how quickly the turnaround would be. Because even for Netflix, it's still a weekly turnaround for each episode. And so before they even went into post-production, I visited the set a few times, and I would send Justin a few ideas for themes here and there. And so by the time we got going, I would get the episode and firstly say, okay, this is Sam's episode. So therefore, every piece of music I write has to come from Sam's theme. And then a lot of the episodes early on were temped out, where I had some temp music that was kind of giving me a guideline to where we should put music, and we would have a meeting to talk about that. But by the later episodes, especially the last episode, it was all empty, and so it was on Justin and I to figure out exactly when to put music in, and so on and so forth. But from that point, it was a pretty standard television turnaround, where I got it and had 3 to 4 days to turn around a finished product to go to mix.
One of the great things about the show is that it's very funny in a lot of things, hysterically funny, but it also it's very dramatic in a lot of instances too. I mean, there's one episode that comes to mind that's particularly upsetting. How do you, as a composer, balance those two extremes?
I think it's one of the main things is about not knowing when to do just enough and when to when it's too much. I think some of the more dramatic moments, like in episode 5, for example, one of the versions we had of a cue where there's this very tense moment was to have this string orchestra come in and did something a little bit more emotional. Same thing with the final episode actually too, which is a similar scenario. And we found that was where we crossed the line. That's when it felt too melodramatic, and we were trying too much with the music. And I think it's mainly just about knowing when I need to step in and kind of give a helping hand, and when the visuals can kind of stand on their own as far as delivering just the right amount of emotion.
They did a very effective job.
Thank you. Yeah.
So any plans for a season 2? Has that been greenlit yet or not?
It hasn't been greenlit yet. I'm excited about the possibility of it, just seeing how these characters grow and how Justin's filmmaking expands even more, but it hasn't been greenlit yet.
Well, knock on wood. I wanted to ask you, so you just last year you won a Daytime Emmy Award for your work on The Snowy Day.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that, what that recognition meant for you.
Yeah, well, it was actually just a few months ago, and or maybe just a month ago, and it was pretty incredible. It was the first time I've ever been nominated for something like that, and it was for this animated Christmas special that we did for Amazon, and that was also my first time writing for animation. And for animation, it's pretty intense. Like I definitely don't envy the people that do that on a day-to-day basis, who because it's wall-to-wall music. You have to know how to comment on things, but we're also dealing with a time where there's very sophisticated music being written for children, and so it's no longer just like kids music. It's just very, very good music, and so trying to write something I felt could do both of those things was pretty difficult. But yeah, to be acknowledged, I think was pretty surprising, again, given that it was kind of my entry into this world.
You'll have to forgive me for saying that was last year. We in the awards watching business,
Right.
our calendars are a little off. Our year ends when Oscar season and daytime Emmy season pretty much ends, and then begins again when primetime Emmy season starts up. So we're on different calendars then.
Definitely.
You've also worked a lot in documentaries. In fact, you were the composer for the Elaine Stritch documentary. You're the composer for the Norman Lear documentary that just came out. Can you talk a bit about working on nonfiction projects?
Yeah, well, it was kind of my first entry point into being a film composer. You know, I didn't do the whole apprenticeship thing or working at a place like Remote Control or anything like that. I came into this just because that Elaine Stritch documentary was my first film, and this woman who was my manager for a while happened to know the director, and so I got that job, and then that kind of led to other things, and I think it just kind of, that world is so insular that if I met an editor on one project, he happened to be working on another project and recommended me for that or put my music into it. And it really became interesting because I've always been a fan of documentaries, but working on them, I started to really dive deep into, some of the iconic films in cinema verite and some of the great documentarian filmmakers in our time. And it's been a really amazing learning process.
This is still relatively early in your career. So I'm curious, I mean, was composing always a part of the plan, or was it, I mean, what was your journey into doing what you do?
Yeah, it's a pretty strange story. My parents have kind of asked me to have a plan very early in life and continue to do that. And so I actually told them, they make fun of me now, or we laugh about it now, because I told them when I was about 11 or 12 that my plan was to go to college for piano and then try to get into somebody's band that I respected and tour with them for a while, then put out my own music and tour with my band, and then to go into film scoring. And that's always been my plan. It's just kind of crazy that it actually worked somehow. So far, we'll see. It could all just crumble at some point, but right now it's working.
You're doing good so far. So, well, Kris, thank you so much. Congratulations on Dear White People and on your daytime Emmy win earlier this year. And thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
Thank you, Zach. Appreciate that.
Yeah, have a good one.